In a small community, there lived a woman who sold vegetables at the local market. Every morning she would arrange her modest display of tomatoes, onions, and greens, hoping to earn enough to feed her own family that evening. She was not wealthy, she was not powerful, but she had something that money could not buy. She had faith. One afternoon, a terrible storm swept through the region. Roads were washed out, markets were closed, power lines fell. For 3 days, no supplies could reach the community. People began to worry. Food was running low. Neighbors whispered anxiously about what would happen if the road stayed closed much longer. On the 4th day, the woman looked at her own pantry. She had 1 bag of rice, a few vegetables, some cooking oil, barely enough to feed her family for 2 more days. She sat in her small kitchen, weighing her options, when she heard a knock at the door. It was her neighbor, an elderly man who lived alone. He looked tired and thin. He asked if she could spare any food. His supplies had run out the day before. The woman looked at her meager pantry, then back at the man's desperate face. And in that moment, she made a decision that defied all logic. She invited him in for a meal. As she began cooking the rice, another knock came. Then another. Word had spread quietly through the community. The woman who sold vegetables was sharing her food. One by one, hungry neighbors appeared at her door. Young mothers with children, elderly couples, workers who had been stranded, each face more desperate than the last. The woman stood in her kitchen, looking at her single pot of rice and then at the growing crowd of hungry people. By any reasonable calculation, she did not have enough. There was no way 1 bag of rice could feed all these people, but something inside her refused to turn anyone away. She began to cook. She added water to stretch the rice. She chopped every vegetable she had into the pot. She added spices and herbs from her small garden, and as she stirred, she whispered a simple prayer. Let this be enough. The woman started serving. 1 plate, then another, then another. She watched in disbelief as the pot seemed to never empty. Every time she thought she had reached the bottom, there was more. Somehow, impossibly, there was always more. She fed 10 people, then 20, then 30. The neighbors sat together on her floor, on her porch, in her small yard. Strangers who had barely spoken before were now sharing a meal, sharing stories, becoming a community. By the time the sun set, the woman had fed 50 people. 50 hungry souls had come to her door with nothing and left with full stomachs and renewed hope. When the last person had been served, she looked into her pot. It was finally empty. The woman sat down, exhausted but overwhelmed with emotion. She had given away everything she had. Her family's food for the next 2 days was gone. But as she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, something extraordinary happened. They began to return. One by one, the people she had fed came back to her door, but this time they were not empty-handed. One brought a bag of flour, another brought beans, someone else brought dried fish. A young woman brought fresh bread she had baked. An elderly couple brought fruit from their tree. Within an hour, the woman's pantry was overflowing. She had more food than when she started. The community she had fed with nothing but faith had become the hands that blessed her in return. But the story does not end there. From that day forward, the woman's small home became a gathering place. Every week, neighbors would bring whatever they could spare, and together they would cook a community meal. What had started as one desperate act of faith became a tradition of sharing that lasted for years. The roads eventually reopened. The market returned to normal. Life went back to its regular rhythm. But something fundamental had changed. The people in that community had learned a truth that hunger and fear had tried to hide. When we share the little we have, it becomes more than enough. Years later, people still talk about the woman who fed 50 strangers with nothing but faith. They remember the miracle of the pot that never emptied, But more than that, they remember what they learned that day. That generosity creates abundance. That community is stronger than scarcity. And that sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we give away the very thing we think we cannot afford to lose. This is the story of a woman who had nothing but gave everything. This is the story of faith that fed a community. And this is a reminder that the measure of what we have is not found in what we keep, but in what we are willing to share.